He was once England's most powerful king, but his final days were anything but regal. What was the horrible death of Henry VIII really like? We all know about Henry VIII. The second Tudor monarch had an infamous reign, a pop star wife and 6 kids who either died young, were sent away, or beheaded. But we don't often hear about his mortal end. While it might not be as gruesome as, say, Richard III, Henry's death was no walk in the park. So grab some dark chocolate, light some candles, and let's get into it. As is typical for a Hollywood movie, let's start with some exposition. Born in 1491, Henry's story began like any other Renaissance prince. He was destined for greatness. Well, that's debatable. Either way, he began his training early. When Henry was just 7 years old, his father, King Henry VII, had him tutored by the best scholars in the land. That included renowned Greek and Latin teachers, a respected mathematician, a musician, and an artist. The boy also got a head start on his royal duties, regularly attending council meetings, observing royal ceremonies, and going on hunting trips with his father. By age 17, Henry was ready to rule. His father was dead, and Henry VIII was crowned king. This was in 1509. Like his dad, Henry VIII was known for being a great hunter, athlete, and outdoorsman. As such, he liked to live large, managing to gain more than 100 pounds during his adult life. However, he did have a relatively lean start, according to historians. In fact, until he turned around the age of 30, Henry was fairly fit and athletic. Of course, this didn't stop him from beating his wife, Catherine of Aragon, every now and then. And he had at least one illegitimate child out of wedlock before having his eyes set on Anne Boleyn, who would become his second wife after he broke from the Catholic Church. But we'll get to that in a bit. For now, it is important to establish that Henry VIII did not suffer from any significant health conditions when he first came to power. Sure, he was obese, but that wasn't necessarily seen as a health condition back then. And while there are claims that he wrestled with bouts of melancholy, it's difficult to diagnose someone who lived 500 years ago. Regardless, what started as a healthy reign soon became a painful one. In the year 1527, and Henry was 36. Over the previous few years, the king had been suffering from some serious health issues. One chronicler described him as looking like a man possessed by the devil, complete with black and yellow skin. Yikes. You see, Henry had developed some massive ulcers on both legs. They were incredibly painful, wouldn't heal, and constantly bled. Supposedly, they looked like rotting flesh and smelled like a gangrenous sore. For those who don't know, gangrene is a condition that occurs when there is insufficient blood flow to a particular area, which then causes that area to die. It can affect any body part, but is most common in the extremities, hands and feet. Gangrene can be caused by injury, infection, exposure to toxins, and in rare cases, medical treatments. The funny thing about these sores is that they are actually pretty common among people who stand on their feet all day, especially if they wear shoes that are too tight. So it's possible that Henry's leg ulcers were just the result of ill-fitting footwear. Unfortunately for Henry, though, these nasty sores didn't go away. In fact, they grew and spread, forcing him to stay off his feet. That wasn't easy, considering that Henry was a huge fan of jousting and hunting, 2 activities that required him to be on his feet. Of course, staying off your feet when you're obese isn't exactly healthy. And so Henry's weight ballooned, putting even more pressure on his legs. At this point, he weighed about 400 pounds, which is almost double what a normal person should weigh. With each passing day, his legs hurt more and more. And to cope, he took to his bed. In fact, during one particularly bad flare-up of his leg ulcers, he stayed in bed for 3 whole weeks. During that time, he had to be lifted from his bed by 8 men. Sadly, he wouldn't be able to walk properly for the last 6 years of his life. Even worse, he had developed a number of other health problems, including what we would today call heart disease. His doctors said that he could barely climb a flight of stairs without getting winded. Clearly, this wasn't sustainable. In an effort to fix his ailments, Henry tried everything. He followed bizarre diets, wore weird shoes, and experimented with different medicines, none of which worked. The truth is, his health continued to decline until he was nothing more than a shell of his former self. His paranoia grew and he became increasingly isolated, spending the last 4 years of his life confined to his bedroom in Hampton Court Palace. Still, he managed to sire 3 more children during that time. But it seems that Henry wasn't all that enthusiastic about fatherhood anymore. In fact, he hated fatherhood in general and wanted none of his children to ascend to the throne. No, he would break from the Catholic Church because he couldn't produce a male heir with Catherine. And he would go on to marry 6 times, all in search of a son and a legitimate heir. Talk about commitment issues. Henry VIII died in January of 1547 at the age of 55. According to the official account written by his physician, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. However, other accounts tell a completely different story. Apparently, Henry had been suffering from excruciating pain for weeks, and on his last night alive, he experienced a terrifying ordeal. To put it mildly, here's what one historian wrote about the king's final hours. The king arose about midnight out of a profound sleep, was suddenly seized with an extreme shivering fit, and with horror and fear called loudly for the queen, who ran into the room wrapped in a very thin gown, for it was summer. She found the king in his nightgown only, in a very low bed, groaning and tossed as if in a fit. Thus she went up to the fire to warm herself, for it was a very cold night. Whereupon the king cried out, "What shall come of me?" Then the queen, comforting him and speaking of remedies, returned again to her bed. About half an hour after, the king sent for her again and asked, "What shall come of me?" The queen, rising hastily, as also the other ladies of the court who lay in the next beds, went again to the king and found him in a very grievous and horrible pain, crying out, "Oh, my back, my back." He was then taken with a shivering fit, lasting about half an hour. After that, he lay still, tossing and turning, saying, "All is come to an end." Then the queen asked, "What is come to an end?" He answered, "All is come to an end. All is come to an end." And with that, he breathed out his soul about the space of 1 whole hour. Yeah, that doesn't sound peaceful at all. So what was really going on? Historians and medical examiners believe that Henry VIII's sores finally turned gangrenous and that he suffered horribly in the days leading up to his death. Others think that he had a massive stroke that paralyzed him and caused him to have seizures. Ultimately, nobody knows for sure, but both scenarios paint a pretty grim picture. Once Henry was dead, he was buried next to his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, who died giving birth to his son, the future King Edward VI. As for his son, well, he died at the young age of 15, which left the throne to Henry's only surviving child, Mary I. Given her father's track record, it's safe to say that Mary's ascent to the throne was a bit of a miracle. Now it's time for you to speak. Do you think Henry VIII's death was divine retribution for his many sins? Or do you think it was just the result of his poor lifestyle choices? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching.